Secretary of State John Kerry has had to cancel meetings with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas because Mr. Abbas signed papers seeking Palestinian membership to 15 UN agencies. Why would that matter, you ask? Well, actually, it's symbolically very explosive because what that means is that the Palestinian leader broke a promise to hold off joining international bodies while engaged in US brokered peace talks with Israel. Mahmoud Abbas decided, though, he was going to proceed anyway. And the reason he'd said he was going to do that was because Israel failed to keep its promise to release Palestinian prisoners at the end of last month. Now, these talks were due to expire at the end of April, but I wonder if what this signals is that the talks have pretty much fallen apart and there's not much hope for them. Professor Gerald Steinberg joins me now, Professor of Political Science with Bar Ilan University in Israel, where he's the founder of the Program on Conflict Management and Negotiation. Gerald Steinberg, thank you very much for joining us. Are the talks now doomed?
Thank you for the invitation to talk to you. Wouldn't say they're doomed. In the Middle East, in the long history of Israeli-Arab, Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, there have been a lot of ups and downs and crises, and a lot of posturing. And it's too early to know whether we're talking about posturing now or whether, in fact, this does mark the end of the road. But all three parties really have a lot of incentives to keep going. The United States wants an agreement desperately. The Israelis want to get out of the status quo, which they find as being quite damaging. Palestinians want to also get out of their situation, which is not quite a state, even though Mahmoud Abbas, as you noted, has signed a lot of papers and is claiming a greater UN role. They don't have boundaries. They don't have all of the necessary institutions of the state. They don't have international recognition. So I'm guessing this is posturing, but we'll have to wait a few days and find out. I suspect we'll see Mr. Kerry back. As you noted, we still have to the end of March for this 9-month period where we're going to try to at least make some progress. I think we'll be back in business, but it's still the Middle East and things are still quite unpredictable.
Well, it's interesting, though, because if the Palestinians really did have an incentive to strike a peace deal, well, they've got the incentive, but if they really believed it was ever going to happen, surely they wouldn't do this. I mean, the fact that they've done this, doesn't that indicate that they believe that the peace negotiations are a sham, they're never going to deliver anything to them, and that the only way they're going to get anything that even resembles some kind of statehood recognition is to take it to the international community?
A large part of any international negotiation, particularly when you're dealing with countries that have populations that are very involved and divided, is in domestic politics. And Mr. Abbas is very much addressing a domestic political crowd in the Palestinian Authority. Let's remember, you've got Hamas controlling Gaza. Hamas has killed members of Fatah. Fatah is the old PLO. That's Mohammed Abbas's party. That's the one that's controlling the West Bank. There's a lot of hostility between them. And within Fatah, Mr. Abbas is now approaching 80, and there's a struggle going on for succession. It's not through electoral politics the way you're used to in Australia and Israel and democratic societies, but there's a lot going on. So Mr. Abbas has to show that he's really, really very tough and he's getting the absolute best deal possible before he says, okay, we've stretched it to the limit. Now we're going to accept this. We're going to accept the American demand that we go back. We've gotten our terrorists, our prisoners back. He's got to appeal to a domestic crowd, and particularly the more radical groups in the domestic crowd. After all, we're talking about a Palestinian society that has been involved in violence and terrorism for over 60 years. On the Israeli side, Mr. Netanyahu has to explain why he's releasing these terrorists, why this is the third, the fourth, maybe a fifth time of releasing terrorists, people who have murdered Israelis, blown up buses in cafeterias, killed women and children. This is the essence of the conflict. Mr. Netanyahu also has to explain what the benefits are from doing this. So the posturing is part of the process, and I would say the United States and Mr. Kerry do not get high marks for managing this. They don't understand the subtleties of both sides and the complexities. This is a conflict that's been going on not since 1967, not since we started using terms like occupation and settlement, but you can go back to November 1947. The UN partition plan was rejected by all of the Arab leaders, or even back to the 1920s and before that. So the Americans need to understand the history and the subtleties, and what we're seeing now is that they've really managed it quite poorly, and this is a desperate attempt to try to keep it going.
Well, you say they're desperate, and perhaps the evidence of that is that they've offered to release Jonathan Pollard, who is convicted as a spy working for Israel while he was working for the American government officially. They've always refused to do this, but now they are doing this now. Do you think that this is really the evidence that this is all they've got left?
I don't know if it's all that got left, but it does show a sense of desperation because every American, this has been going on, the Pollard case has been going on for 30 years. It's really soured American-Israeli relations, at least in that dimension. And there are demonstrations for Pollard's release. Every Israeli political leader is under pressure to try to negotiate Pollard's release. Every American president, Clinton and Bush and others, have talked about it, but have not gone to that step. There's a lot of opposition in the U.S. intelligence community. We don't know why. Now, all of a sudden, Pollard's on the table. And that does suggest that something very fundamental is going on. It's got nothing to do with the Pollard case or nothing to do with American-Israeli relations, but very much a desperate attempt to try to keep these negotiations going by giving Mr. Netanyahu a domestic reason to be able to justify the release of another, we've heard, 400 Palestinian terrorists. There's a lot of opposition to that. And so the Americans are really clutching at straws. It might work. I don't think we should say that it's completely out of the question, but it really shows you that for 9 months there has not been any significant progress.
That's right. Well, we'll see what happens. If this does save the talks, it could be a very, very significant development. Thank you very much, Gerald. That's Gerald Steinberg, Professor of Political Science at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. It's 7:30.